This is a brilliant pawn sacrifice. White plays rook to e1, sacrificing the pawn on g4. Then rook g1 with tempo, knight escapes, and then we have check. The pawn cannot take it because the pawn is pinned, so king goes to the corner, and then we have a brilliant rook sacrifice. And this is what I'm going to teach you in this video. You will know exactly when and how to sacrifice your pawns in every stage of the game. I wrote down 5 rules to help you understand this concept much better. What you want to remember is that in the openings we sacrifice a pawn if it accelerates your development significantly. Let's take a look at this position. The last move was queen b6 with the attack on b2 pawn. And many players could play in this situation pawn to b3 defending this pawn, or for example queen c1. And black also cannot capture our pawn on b2. The only issue with these two moves is that both moves are reactive and don't improve our position. And that's why I think better solution would be to castle, sacrificing the pawn. Black takes this, and then we play knight d2, protecting our rook. So here we developed 2 pieces. We castled and brought the knight into the game, while our opponent was busy taking the pawn on b2. And now there are 2 scenarios. One is black wants to play bishop e7 followed by castling, so he tries to continue development. The second option for him is moving the queen back to safety. Let's take a look at both examples. Let's start with bishop e7. Now white can play rook b1, giving up another pawn. Black takes this, and we play queen c1. So if the opponent is not careful, we can already trap the queen. After rook a1, the queen doesn't have any safe squares. So the queen escapes to avoid it, and then we play knight b3 with tempo. The queen doesn't have any good squares, so she goes back to d8. And now let's stop for a moment and let's take a look at the situation. Let's calculate pieces on the board. We castled, so this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can see 6 active pieces in white's position, while our opponent has only 2. And we sacrifice 2 pawns to achieve that, but next turn we will take one of them for sure. So it will be only 1 pawn advantage for black after that. Most of the time, if you can if you can develop 3 pieces for 1 pawn, this should be okay. Sometimes even 2 pieces are enough, but most of the time, if you develop 3 pieces while your opponent takes your pawn, this compensation should be good. So queen goes to d8, and then we take, for example, on c5 with the knight, with immediate attack on b7. And I definitely prefer position for white. All these pieces don't play while our position is like very active. Let's take a look at the second example, second variation. So after queen takes b2, we played knight d2, and we said that bishop e7 is the first option, and the second option is our opponent escapes. And after that, we can play rook b1, queen goes back to d8, and let's calculate pieces on the board. We castle, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 active pieces on the board already, and our opponent has only 1. Yes, and we sacrifice only 1 pawn. We have massive lead in development. I think now it's time to maybe open up the center and try to complete development, that's for sure. Yes, so queen and the rook should play, but then we will be ready to attack our opponent. Okay, let's take a look at another example. So here, white plays pawn to c4, sacrificing a pawn in the opening. And when you want to sacrifice these pawns, remember you need to accelerate your development significantly. So we played c4, and black captured this because we cannot play e4. Yes, we cannot take control of the whole center, knight protects this, but then white plays queen c2. And now black, instead of thinking about developing the pieces, maybe knight, bishop, trying to open up the rook somehow, black decided to defend the pawn. So what we do next is we play a4, activating our rook, putting more pressure on this pawn, and black plays pawn to c6, defending this. Let's calculate pieces on the board, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and our opponent has 1, 2, 3. So this time, black has pawn advantage, we sacrifice the pawn and we have only 2 active pieces. But like you can see, we developed the queen, right? We opened up the rook does something on this a file, while our opponent just pushed these pawns and all of that is stuck. And this gives us enough compensation right now. Actually, after taking on b5, we are winning material because after playing knight g5, the rook is trapped. The only option would be to play knight d5, but that's why, to block this diagonal, but that's why we play knight g5, because now his knight is busy defending the pawn on h7, so cannot move anywhere. So that was another example, and before we move on to Gambits, let me show you one more example, but this time we will have incorrect pawn sacrifice in the opening. So here we play e4, c6, and we have the Caro-Kann, d5, and white plays knight c3, knight f6, and after knight f6, we can see that pawn is attacked twice, and we defend only with the knight. But I want you to focus on this d4 pawn at the moment. If black takes this pawn on e4, queen will attack this pawn, but at the moment queen defends this, so this is not a problem. But I want to show you the solution that white has chosen here. Bishop d3, and the idea is that after taking this, we take back. Knight is of course well defended, everything is okay, but the idea is that white sacrifices the pawn on d4 to attack the queen with tempo. So we play knight f3, let's assume queen goes back, and then we take it, pawn takes, we castle, bishop goes e7. And now the question is, do we have enough compensation? If we calculated this is 1, 2, 3, and the opponent has 1 piece on the board, so we have 2 more pieces. And I think in this case, this is different, and in my opinion, we probably don't have enough compensation. We don't have compensation. And also the key difference between this position and the previous, for example, this one, where our opponent played queen b6, the difference is that after queen b6, the alternatives to castling are queen c1 or b3. And both these moves are reactive and don't improve our position. We waste our time. And so castling is like really great alternative to that. But in this position, where our opponent played knight f6, there is no need to sacrifice this pawn. Yes, we can play, white decided to play bishop d3, sacrificing this pawn, but there is no need to do that. We have also other alternatives. We can take it, but probably the best might be playing e5 with tempo on the knight. Let's move on to Gambits. And here we have Danish Gambit. We play e4, e5, we sacrifice the pawn on d4, we sacrifice another pawn, bring our bishops in the meantime, and then our opponent checks us. And like I said before, if you think about sacrificing a pawn, be sure that you develop many pieces in the meantime. And most of the time, if you develop 3 pieces while your opponent is taking your pawn, this should be enough compensation in the opening. Sometimes even 2 pieces are enough if you have good reasons. And here we sacrifice 2 pawns, and we have like very small lead in development. Yes, because we have 2 active pieces and our opponent has 1. But what I want to tell you is that Gambits have different dynamic, and I think we shouldn't look at it the same way like I told you with this rule. Yes, so the Gambits are exceptions. Many times we want to trap our opponent quickly, yes, make some good tricks and win the game. By the way, if you sacrifice your pawns by accident in your games, it means that you blunder them or you blunder even pieces. I have a great solution for you. I've created a course on how to avoid blunders, and you can get it today for free. You will find the link in the description. If you want to sacrifice your pawns correctly in the middle game, you need to remember that we have 2 types of positions. We have sharp and calm positions. And the rule says In sharp positions, piece activity is the most important. Here, we will sacrifice pawns more frequently. Let's take a look at this position. This is the example of a sharp position. Most of the time, if we castle opposite, it will be already sharp because we will use our pawns on the king side to attack our opponent. We will create a pawn storm, and our opponent wants to do the same. It's a very dynamic position, and here piece activity will be more important than our pawns. So quite often we will sacrifice them. Let's move on to another example. So here we castled the same side, but this will be also type of sharp position, because here black already sacrificed the pawn. Black is down the pawn in this situation. But let's take a look at this scenario. This bishop looks at the king side, also the knight. The bishop is quite close here, threatening the mate on g2. The rook also attacks our position. A lot of things happen on the board, and I think maybe our opponent will even push f5, f4, opening the rook from f8, adding more pressure to the attack. Black doesn't win the game after bishop f3 because we have queen f1. We have a defense to this threat, but this is also type of sharp position because just a lot of things happen on the board. There is attack present at the moment, and that's why we have sharp position. And let's move on to another one. This is my favorite one because this is from the game of my student that he played recently in over the board tournament. And what happened here is black played bishop d7. So we already know that this will be sharp position because we have opposite castlings. And after bishop d7, what our opponent wants to do, black wants to play rook c8 and then knight a5 and start to attack our position using the pieces. So my student knew that he has to do something faster. And he started to launch his own attack with playing g4 with tempo on the knight, knight e3. We don't win the pawn because there is also the queen which defends this pawn. And this is for on the pawn and on our rook on d1. So here we can play rook g1 defending this pawn on g4, but my student had better idea. So he played rook e1, threatening to win this pawn at the moment. So black captured it. We have rook g1 with the attack on the knight. And white quickly completed development. Black escapes to h6. I think the opponent wanted to have more pieces around the king, and then we have check. And the pawn cannot take it, as the pawn is pinned, so black has to take with the bishop, and then we take it back, and we have immediate attack on g7 pawn. That's why he decided to go to the corner, and we have a brilliant rook sacrifice, which is completely correct, a threatening mate in one, so black captured this, and then we have rook d1 check. King goes to the corner, and now we have discovered attack. So we again sacrifice another pawn in order to bring our queen into the game. And here, I think the position is completely lost at the moment. So black has decided to give up the knight. And then he took the pawn. We have queen h6. Mates are everywhere. Black captured this, and the game is over. So going back to this position, again, where black played bishop d7, pawn to g4 allowed us to complete development faster because this rook didn't play, and now we did it. But also it opened up the line for our opponent's king. Yes, we can, and we created faster attack. The opponent didn't even complete development in that case because he didn't have time to do that. Let's take a look at the type of position, calm position, where we will rarely sacrifice our pawns. So if we look closer here, we can see that the material is even, and it's quite difficult to find actually good game plans for both players. The point is that we cannot open up the middle, is because white protects this square many times, and same for white. If we want to play c4, right, he attacks this square many times. It would also damage our pawn structure. We would create isolated pawn after c4. So in the middle, it's quite difficult to change some pawn structure. Also, both players don't have many weaknesses at the moment. We castle at the same time. And this is the type of calm position. There is a weak pawn on b2, well protected. It's difficult for black to add more pressure. Same here. Weak pawn, but we cannot attack this at the moment. And in these types of positions, we will rarely sacrifice our pawns. The 4 rules that I'm going to give you can completely change your approach to your pawns. But before we get there, let me show you how to sacrifice our pawns in endgames. And the rule says, prioritize king activity over pawns in the endgame. So the last move for black was rook h2, and with the attack on our c2 pawn. So if we think about defending this pawn, we can play rook a2 or rook c1, but just look at this rook if we play rook c1 here. We will place our rook behind all these pawns, and this rook is completely inactive. Also rook a2, we defend the pawn and we still play actively on the a file, but I think white has much better solution here. And instead of defending this pawn, white has decided to play king f5, activating the king. So our goal will be to push our opponent's king to the edge, create some threats, and sacrifice the pawns. Rook takes c2, and then white plays king e6. Yes, so we are closer to his king. We also can take the pawn on d5 now. Black takes the pawn, we check him, king goes to the back. And now let's take a look at this move. White plays to rook h1, threatening rook h8 check. We are very close to mate our opponent. It's not yet there because after knight d8, we will play king e7 and at least we will win the knight on d8. So we already created a powerful threat. The opponent found the solution. He captured on d4 with check. We take it. And here, I think black has the only move, which is rook d3 to defend the knight. Otherwise, if this knight goes somewhere, I expect white to just check. Let's say king goes to d7 and we have already checkmate. Like there are many threats at the moment, so black has to play rook to d3 with this discovered check, and then white captured rook d2, and we have a completely even position. And the position is drawish right now, but instead of defending our pawn with the rook, yes, still playing rook c1 and playing inactively, we activated our king, we created some threats, and we gave ourselves a chance to win this game. And now we move on to the most important question. How significant is the pawn advantage? I often hear from my student that it's not so much because opponents blunder pawns as well, or they blunder even pieces, so it's not so important. And I disagree. And the 4th rule says, respect your pawns. A pawn advantage can change entire dynamic of the game. In the openings, we try to play as active as we can, take initiative in early stage, but when we win a pawn, the priorities change. Now our main goal is to trade pieces, especially queens. Why? Just take a look at this position. So here we don't have any pieces on the board and we are up a pawn. So what I will do is I will bring my king to the middle. I think my opponent might try to do a similar thing, and then I will push my pawns and I should easily win this game. Now, take a look at the situation where we didn't trade our pieces and also we have queens on the board. It's the same pawn structure, but the position looks like that. Now it's much easier to blunder something, or it's much easier for your opponent to find some counterplay. And in the previous example, without the pieces, it didn't exist. Yeah, so losing the game might be not so easy for you when you have this pawn advantage here. And that's why we trade pieces and we try to simplify the position. And what our opponent needs to do is he needs to avoid trading pieces, and also he needs to find a way to complication the position. And how do you think what is easier? So remember that when we are up a pawn, we want to trade pieces and simplify the position, and the pawn advantage can already change the whole dynamic of the game and make this game much easier for you. I appreciate you watched this video. Remember to check out my course on how to avoid blunders that you can get today for free. Just visit my website, the link is in the description. And if you want to master pawn play, check out my previous video where I explain the central pawn play in chess. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and see you next time.